With only 17 days left, Charles Oliveira has entered a focused and intense training camp to prepare for Ilia Topuria's relentless pressure and unbeaten streak. However, Charles Oliveira's training has reached a new level of intensity as the fight draws closer, with just 17 days remaining. He's been pushing himself hard in every session, especially during sparring rounds with his top-level teammates. Reports from the gym say Charles has been going full speed, testing his timing and endurance while simulating Topuria's aggressive style. His sparring partners are putting him through constant pressure, forcing him to react, adapt, and fire back under fatigue. Every session is treated like a real fight, with Charles focused on sharpening his striking combinations, defensive footwork, and quick transitions to grappling. The energy in the camp is serious. Oliveira is clearly leaving no room for mistakes. Furthermore, Charles Oliveira took his sparring to the open ring this week, training in front of a live audience as part of his final preparations. Surrounded by fans and teammates, he embraced the pressure, treating each round like a real fight under the spotlight. The crowd watched as he pushed through intense exchanges, showing sharp hands, solid defense, and quick transitions. The energy in the room fueled his pace, and Charles never held back, landing clean shots and staying composed under pressure. This public session wasn't just for show, it was a test of focus, control, and performance under watchful eyes, and Charles delivered with confidence. Meanwhile, UFC legend Chael Sonnen recently reacted with disbelief after learning that Ilia Topuria is the betting favorite in his upcoming lightweight debut against former champ Charles Oliveira. For Sonnen, it didn't make much sense that a proven fighter like Oliveira, who not only wore the belt but defended it and holds the UFC record for most submission wins, would be placed as the underdog. He questioned how quickly people seem to forget Oliveira's achievements and dominance, suggesting that someone with his resume should be given much more credit in this kind of fight.
Minus 370 favorite Topuria is to beat Charles Do Bronx Oliveira.
What?
Minus 370.
That is insane. That is not right.
To be the world champion that defended 3 times, has more submissions than anyone in UFC history, and he's a minus 370 favorite.
On the other hand, Paddy Pimblett shared his thoughts on the UFC 317 showdown, backing Ilia Topuria as a serious threat to Charles Oliveira. While he gave Oliveira credit for being durable and experienced, Paddy questioned how much damage the former champ can still take after such a long and grueling career. He highlighted Charles's habit of fighting recklessly at times, warning that such risks might cost him dearly against a sharp and explosive fighter like Ilia. Paddy also brought attention to the weight jump, noting that fans often overlook how different featherweight and lightweight really are. Since Oliveira has a build similar to his own, Pimblett believes that physical strength and size could play a major role, especially if the bout stays on the feet.
Ilia beats Charles then?
I think he might, to be honest. Charles is a bit chinny, isn't he? You know what I mean? He's had about 40 fights or something. He always gets punched. He always gets cracked.
Yeah.
So,
he's reckless, but he's super exciting.
Yeah, he is.
And he's dangerous.
Exciting. If he gets him down, I can see him winning, because that £10 difference is a big difference.
Yeah.
145 to 155, it's a big difference. People don't understand that because they don't watch the sport or they're not involved in the sport. But that £10 makes a big difference. And especially, like, Charles is like my height. Ilia's like down here when I stand up, know what I mean? So it's going to make a big difference.
Additionally, Paddy Pimblett also mentioned that Ilia Topuria might be caught off guard by Charles Oliveira's size when they finally stand across from each other. He explained that moving up from a lower division can be tricky, and fighters often don't realize the real size and strength gap until they're actually in the cage. Paddy pointed to names like Bobby Green and Michael Chandler, fighters who looked bigger on paper but felt different during the fight. That kind of surprise, he said, could be a factor for Ilia, especially if Charles uses his frame to control distance and dictate the pace.
Ilia might get a bit of a fright at how big Charles is when he stands opposite him. Fighters do that with me, who fight at lightweight. You know what I mean? I'll never forget Bobby Green looking over at me and being like, what, he's big him. Same with Chandler. Like people thought Chandler was going to be bigger than me, and he just weren't.
Moreover, Charles Oliveira's training has reached savage levels, and with just 17 days left, he's not holding anything back. In an open ring session in front of fans, Charles went to war with his teammates, showing no hesitation, no fear. The sparring was raw, aggressive, and full of intensity. His partners came at him like Ilia Topuria would, throwing wild combos and constant pressure, but Charles stayed sharp, landing clean shots and staying on his feet. The crowd watched as he absorbed the heat and fired back even harder. He wasn't there to perform, he was there to prepare. Every round looked like a fight, not practice. This isn't the same Charles, this version is meaner, hungrier, and ready to break anyone in front of him. His teammate turned up the pace to give Charles a harder challenge, throwing fast combinations and trying to test his limits. But Charles stayed locked in. He slipped punches with ease, fired back with clean counters, and kept pushing forward without hesitation. The crowd around the ring was on edge, watching every move as Charles controlled the pace with calm aggression. His footwork was tight, his timing was perfect, and every shot landed with purpose. That round showed everyone watching that Charles isn't training to keep up, he's training to take over. However, Michael Bisping broke down the clash between Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira, describing Oliveira as a non-stop threat who's always coming forward, throwing strikes, and looking to lock in a submission the moment there's an opening. He pointed out that Oliveira's pressure and unpredictability make him one of the most dangerous fighters in the division. However, Bisping also emphasized that this would be Topuria's first fight at lightweight, which brings some unknowns into the equation. Still, he praised Ilia's crisp boxing, relentless forward movement, and strong Greco-Roman wrestling, admitting that with those weapons, he wouldn't be surprised if Topuria walked away with the win.
Ilia versus Charles Du Bronx Oliveira. You know, Charles, he's a dangerous, aggressive son of a bitch. Gonna walk forward, punches, knees, elbows, he'll lock on a submission. Ilia, this is his first fight at lightweight, and with the punching power of Ilia Topuria, the boxing that he has, the footwork that he has, and the Greco-Roman wrestling, it wouldn't surprise me if Ilia pulls it off.
At last, Michael Bisping praised Ilia Topuria's impressive climb through the ranks, noting how his confidence is matched by his results inside the cage. He pointed out that Topuria doesn't just win, he dominates, finishing fights cleanly while avoiding major damage. Bisping emphasized that Ilia is usually the one in control, dealing out punishment rather than taking it. He believes a win over Charles Oliveira would be a major milestone in Topuria's career, and said it wouldn't be a shock if Ilia came in as the betting favorite, considering how sharp and dangerous he's been every time he steps into the octagon.
I would say Ilia Topuria, given everything that he's done in the sport, the confidence that he's shown,
The manifestation is
the kids say, but bringing it all to a reality, knocking out everyone in his way, doing it in absolute style, hardly breaking a sweat, not having to fight through any adversity, not being the hammer and the nail. He's just been the hammer, just hammering his way through everyone. If he beats Charles Oliveira, which I would assume that he's going to be the favourite to do, and that's with absolutely no disrespect towards Charles Oliveira at all.
Moreover, Robert Whittaker shared his thoughts on the current buzz in the lightweight division, especially with Ilia Topuria making the jump. He noted that Topuria was allegedly offered a title shot by the UFC if he vacated his featherweight belt, which shows how highly the promotion values him. Whittaker said he supports the idea of champions moving up and getting big fights right away, but also recognized how frustrating that can be for contenders who've worked their way up the hard way. At the end of the day, he believes the UFC will prioritize whatever matchup brings the biggest payday.
I think the lightweight division is the most exciting division right now. It's just death row in the lightweight division at the moment. Like the top 5, dude, that guard up there right now, it's just killers, man.
But especially with Ilia Topuria entering the mix, right? The whole big story over the past week was he obviously vacated the title at featherweight, but apparently he said the UFC told him, we promise you a title opportunity if you vacate. That's what he told Spanish media. Or I think he said as a backup he would fight Charles Oliveira. And now they've gone back and forth. What do you reckon, Rob?
I don't know what was promised or anything, but I feel like if you're in a lower division and you vacate the title, you should go straight to the top of the pecking order. I'd like to see him go straight into a title shot. Okay. Understandably, it can be tricky that way because there are a lot of guys, like, styles make fights. So if the champion of a lighter division has a better style to beat the guy in the high division, where's the fairness of that? Because that guy may not get through 10 guys to get to a title shot. He may not get through the contenders. Yeah, I just feel like there should be a certain amount of weight for being the champion of the division already. I can also see the side of the argument for the guys in the division that have been like, brother, like, I've had to slog, especially in the lightweight division, like, I've had to slog my way to the top of this division, and it is death row there. I think the UFC is going to do what makes them the most money.
Furthermore, MMA guru and Demetrius Johnson both offered their insights on the potential clash between Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira. MMA guru called it a huge pay-per-view draw, even without a title on the line, and praised the matchup for its action potential. However, he raised concerns about how well Topuria will handle the jump to 155 pounds, given the strength and pace of the division. On the other hand, Demetrius Johnson highlighted that Topuria is a naturally big fighter, reportedly walking around at 191 pounds. He expressed surprise that Ilia stayed at featherweight for as long as he did, and said the move to lightweight makes perfect sense. Johnson added that watching elite fighters test themselves in higher weight classes always adds an extra layer of excitement.
If Ilia Topuria fights Charles Oliveira on a pay-per-view, that's a big deal.
Oh, it's gonna be bigger.
They don't need to wait for an interim belt. They don't need to wait for an undisputed. So yeah, I don't know how he's gonna do it lightweight though. Maybe you can speak on that. He's a smaller guy coming up.
It's a smaller coming up. It'll be interesting because he is bigger from when I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast. Like 191, I think he was walking around. It's massive. So for him to cut to 145 seems almost like, how did he do that? But now that he's going up to 155, I always like when athletes go up.
Meanwhile, Javier Mendez shared his thoughts on a potential fight between Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira, saying he slightly favors Topuria. He highlighted Ilia's crisp boxing in tight spaces and his ability to connect with clean, powerful shots as key advantages. Mendez pointed out that Oliveira's upright stance could be risky if he fails to control the distance with well-timed knees or front kicks. While acknowledging Charles's reach and dangerous kicking game, Mendez believes Topuria's overall skill set is more complete and gives him a better shot at coming out on top.
Why else do you think you would pick Ilia over Charles? What is it about his skill set that you like more?
It's basically because Charles is going to stand in there upright, like you're saying, and when he gets inside, he's going to use that boxing, and Charles' head's going to be up, and Ilia's got a really good way of connecting with that chin on the inside. Really, really nice, just like what he did with Volk. You know, and I think if Charles doesn't get him up the middle with knees or front kicks up the middle, he's going to have a hard time with his boxing against him, and he's going to have a hell of a time trying to take him down. So it's going to be one of those where Ilia's got more opportunities than Charles does. But Charles can surprise us with his length, you know, and up the middle would be really, really well suited for him. And the kicks too, you know, body, head type thing, you know, low, high, you know, he could do really well with that.
On the other hand, Khamzat Chimaev spoke highly of Ilia Topuria's journey in the UFC, recalling their early training days together at All Stars Gym. Long before Topuria became a recognized force, Chimaev said he could already see the spark in him. Both fighters were rising through the ranks in Brave FC at the time, and Chimaev remembered Ilia as intensely focused and determined, always pushing himself during sessions. He noted that Topuria had the right mindset and raw talent even back then. Now, watching Ilia on the verge of reaching the top, Chimaev said it feels like the natural outcome of years of hard work and hunger.
Очень известный сейчас боец. Ты с ним вроде как давно знаком. Он тренировался в Альстаре вместе, вот до еще его всей известности. Когда вот тренировки ты его видел, ты видел этот потенциал в будущем?
Ну, конечно, ну просто тогда, в то время, этот был он хорошим топовым бойцом в Брейве, и как и я, мы оба там выступали. Видно было, потому что он такой пахарь и хочет добиться чего-то в своей жизни. И парень добился. всех высот, которые можно в этом спорте добиться.
However, Renato Moicano weighed in on the anticipated clash between Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira, saying it's far more competitive than people are giving it credit for. While many think Topuria will dominate, Moicano pushed back, highlighting Oliveira's toughness, finishing ability, and experience against elite competition. He also mentioned that Topuria's move up from featherweight adds an extra layer of difficulty for both sides. Though he initially leaned toward Topuria, Moicano revealed that a recent conversation with Charles on his Brazilian podcast changed his perspective. The exchange made him feel more connected to Oliveira, and now he's throwing his support behind him.
You're fighting on the Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria card. Charles is a big underdog. How do you see that fight going?
Man, that's a tougher matchup that a lot of people think. They think Topuria gonna run through Charles. You never count Charles Oliveira out. I think he's very tough. But Topuria is good, you know? He's 145. It's going to be a tough fight for both fighters. I don't have one opinion on that. I was leaning more to Topuria, but today I just had a podcast with Charles on my Brazilian channel. It's just very hard to not like the guy. That makes harder, you know, to pick against him. So I'm going with Charles just because he's Brazilian.
So what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira? We would love to hear your thoughts, so share your thoughts in the comments section and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video.